Imagine driving for, say, 4.5 hours and seeing almost nothing, just this huge, empty landscape. Well, that's Wyoming. It's actually bigger than the entire United Kingdom, but has fewer than 600,000 people. And you know what? This emptiness, it's not an accident. It's the key to understanding a massive contradiction that's playing out right in the heart of the American West.
So let's just get right to it. Here's the central question of this whole explainer. Why on earth is America's most conservative, most coal-dependent state suddenly building the nation's largest wind farm? I mean, on the surface, it makes absolutely no sense. But today, we are going to solve this puzzle.
I mean, just look at the contrast here. It's wild. You've got Wyoming, teeny tiny population, deep red politics, and it's the source of 40% of America's coal. Then you have California, massive population, deep blue, and it's in a sprint toward a 100% renewable future. You literally could not find two states that are more different, which makes their strange partnership even more fascinating.
All right, first up, the cowboy states paradox. See, to get to the bottom of this mystery, you first have to understand why Wyoming's entire economy is basically designed to resist exactly this kind of change.
And it all comes down to this one little term, the severance tax. Basically, whenever coal, oil, or gas gets pulled out of Wyoming's land to be sold somewhere else, the state takes a cut. And we're not talking about a small tax here. This is the financial lifeblood of the entire state.
Because of that severance tax, the average household in Wyoming pays a shockingly low amount in state and local taxes. We're talking only about $3,500 a year. But get this. In return for that $3,500, that same household gets about $27,000 worth of public services. You know, everything from schools to roads. It is an unbelievable deal. And that right there is the core of the paradox. People who live there get this massive 80 to 90% discount on public services, and it's all bankrolled by the fossil fuel industry. Now, a system like that, well, it creates some very, very strange incentives. Think about it this way. In most states, when a new person moves in, they bring in more tax money than they use in services. It's a net gain. But in Wyoming, it's the total opposite. Because taxes are so low, new residents are actually a massive drain on the budget. The state literally has a financial reason to stay empty. More people just means there's less pie left for everyone else. And, of course, that economic reality completely shapes the culture. When you look at a survey of 8 Western states, Wyoming is the only one where a majority of people say they want to maximize the use of fossil fuels. So you can see there's this deep structural resistance to green energy. Okay, so let's put a pin in Wyoming for just a second and switch gears to the other side of our puzzle. Section 2, California's power crisis. We got to understand why the Golden State is, frankly, running out of juice. So back in September of 2022, California faced a perfect storm. A historic heat wave was sending energy demand through the roof. At the exact same time, smoke from wildfires was literally choking out their solar panels, cutting their efficiency by 30%. And a bad drought meant the reservoirs for hydropower were at record lows. So demand was spiking just as supply was completely collapsing. This chart just shows you how dangerously close they came to a total disaster on September 6th. Peak demand hit an all-time high, while the maximum supply was at rock bottom. Widespread blackouts were literally minutes away. The only thing that stopped it was a last-minute emergency text that went out begging people to cut back on power. And it worked, just barely. This near miss really shines a spotlight on a huge problem for California's future. The state has a legal mandate, a goal to get 100% of its electricity from renewable sources by 2045. But how can they possibly do that when their main renewables, solar and hydro, fail on the hottest days, which is exactly when they need the power most? And that question, it brings us to Section 3, where 2 very different stories finally collide. The unlikely alliance. This is where we see how Wyoming's wind provides the perfect, if unexpected, solution to California's problem. Okay, this is the aha moment. Just look at how perfectly these 2 states' needs and resources line up. California's demand for power, it peaks in the late afternoon, right when solar starts to fade out. And guess what happens in Wyoming in the late afternoon? The wind starts howling. It's strongest after 4 p.m. and it works overtime long after the sun goes down. Wyoming is home to half of the entire nation's best wind resources, and it just happens to kick into high gear at the precise moment California needs it most. It's a perfect match. So, perfect match, right? But it was anything but easy. Getting a wind farm approved in Wyoming is, well, it's an 18-year bureaucratic maze. You have to get state permits as an industrial facility. That's the same category as a radioactive waste site, by the way. Then you got to get county approval, navigate this bizarre federal land ownership checkerboard pattern, and then fight off endless legal challenges from NIMBYs, the not in my backyard folks. So who in their right mind would take on a gamble like that? Well, enter Philip Anschutz, a billionaire oil tycoon and a major Republican megadonor. His plan is just immense. Build America's biggest wind farm with 1,000 turbines out in Carbon County, Wyoming, and then run a $3 billion, 700-mile-long power line straight to California. And against all odds, after almost 2 decades of fighting, he actually got it approved. So the mystery is solved, but solving it reveals one final incredible twist in the story. Welcome to Wyoming's high-stakes gamble. The state has a solution to its fading coal economy, but now it has to figure out if it can actually tax the wind to save itself. See, here's the problem for the locals. Yeah, wind development brings in thousands of jobs, but the vast majority of those are short-term construction gigs. Once the turbines are up and spinning, they only need about 500 to 1,500 people for long-term maintenance. That's just a drop in the bucket compared to the thousands of stable, high-paying jobs in coal, oil, and gas. So if the wind jobs can't replace the coal jobs, Wyoming is trying to make the wind tax revenue replace the coal tax revenue. And to do that, Wyoming did something no other state has ever done. It put a tax on wind energy.
And this sets up the big gamble. The state legislature is basically playing a high-stakes game of chicken. They're betting that Wyoming's wind is so good, so powerful, and so perfectly timed for California's needs that developers will be willing to pay a premium tax to get it. If they're right, this new money could save their entire economy. But if they're wrong, if they tax it just a little too much, the developers could just pack up their billions and go to Colorado or New Mexico instead.
Which leaves us with the final critical question. This entire saga, this completely unlikely alliance between the bluest and reddest of states, it all comes down to this. Can Wyoming successfully tax the wind to save its coal-funded way of life? The future of the American West might just depend on the answer.